welcome back. I know we're back to having a little bit of a glare, but it is what it is. So today we're in the writing packet. We're not in the reading packet today, so you should have received two separate packets for English, and today we're in the writing one. So we're on pages 8 through 10 of the writing packet, and this is for Wednesday, May 6th. So what you're going to see on page 8, that's going to be completely independent work. That's just a little journal entry where you write about the topic that they give you. I want you guys to write at least one paragraph for that. Now, how many sentences in a paragraph? 5 to 7. So you need to write at least 5 to 7 sentences. You can write more than that, but that's just the minimum that you need to write. So that journal asks you, again, this is on page 8, it says, what is something you've experienced recently that was surprising or unusual, and then explain. So you take one paragraph to write about that. It's going to ask you what was surprising or unusual about it, that sort of thing. Moving on to page 9 in the packet, we're talking about phrases and clauses. Let me know if we've covered this in the first packet because it's sounding really super familiar to me, but maybe it was with 8th grade. So phrases and clauses are two separate things that make up a sentence, okay? So a phrase, the definition of a phrase is that it might contain the subject or the predicate, but it'll never contain both. So first we need to know and understand what a subject is and what a predicate is. Okay, so a subject of the sentence is who or what the sentence is talking about. The predicate of a sentence is like more so what's happening in that sentence, like the action in the sentence is going to take place in the predicate. Now, a phrase could also contain, I should have written that, can also contain neither. So sometimes a phrase doesn't have a subject or a predicate, it just has neither one. So if we look at this example, it says the great American artist Romare Bearden was born on September 2nd, 1911. So the first phrase in this sentence would be the great American artist Romare Bearden. Now, does this sentence contain the subject, predicate, or neither? Well, if we look at this sentence, this whole sentence saying he was born on September 2nd is talking about this Romare Bearden. So that's how we know that this is our subject. So this is a phrase that contains the subject and nothing else. Now, if we move on, was born on September 2nd, 1911. Where's our action here? He was born. And that is our predicate because that is what's happening in the sentence. He was born on this day. That's how it's happening. Now, this on September 2nd, 1911 is also a phrase. And it's just explaining more, just giving us extra information on when he was born. And so this one has neither. It's not the subject or the predicate. It's just a phrase. So phrases, again, they could have the subject, the predicate, or neither one, but it can never have both the subject and the predicate. If it has both the subject and the predicate, then that makes it a clause, not a phrase. So a clause contains both a subject and a predicate. That's what makes a clause. Now there's two different types of clauses. There's independent clause and dependent clause. An independent clause can stand alone, while dependent clauses depend on another clause to make sense. So an easy way to remember this is we all know what independent means. So you can be on your own, you can take care of yourself, that sort of thing. If you live with your parents pay your bills, all that kind of stuff, you are not independent. You're dependent. So you need that other person to be able to function, just like the independent clause depends on another clause to be able to make sense. So the example we're looking at here is, although Baradin was born in North Carolina, his family moved to New York. Now what we need to do here, this one's easy, and a lot of them will have a comma breaking up the two clauses. So this one here has a comma. So we know we have two clauses. The first one is, although Baradin was born in North Carolina, and the second one is, his family moved to New York. An easy way to identify the different types of clauses is that when you read it on its own, if it makes sense and you're not like looking for more information, then that makes it an independent clause. If you're looking for more information and it doesn't totally make sense, then that would make it a dependent clause because it needs something else to make a little bit more sense. So this first one, although Baradin was born in North Carolina, if I said, although he was born in North Carolina, and I stopped talking, you would say, although he was born in North Carolina, what? Like, what more information are you going to give me? Because that doesn't make sense on its own. If you just said Baradin was born in North Carolina, that makes sense on its own, but you're saying, although Baradin was born in North Carolina. Although what? Like, what else do you have to say? So that makes it a dependent clause. That kind of looks like a P, but it's not dependent. Now this one, his family moved to New York. If I just said his family moved to New York, you might be wondering whose family moved to New York, but if you said Baradin's family moved to New York, okay, they moved to New York. That's it. That's the only information you need. So that's going to be our independent clause. So now we're going to take a look at the page in the packet together, and we will discuss and do those questions at the bottom of page 9, and then you guys will do page 10 on your own. So we're going to take a look at that right now. Okay, so now we're at the bottom of page 9 here to do this guided practice together. So the guided practice, again, we're looking at phrases and clauses. It says circle P for phrase or C for clause. So that's just what we're doing over here. To identify the underlined group of words in a sentence, then write D over any dependent clauses. So we just need to identify whether the underlined part is a phrase or if it's a clause. And then if it is a clause, then if it's a dependent clause, we need to write a D above it. So let's read our hint really quickly. A dependent clause often begins with before, after, or until. Just like up here, how this one began with although. Because if we just said Baradin was born in North Carolina, that makes sense on its own. But that although is what makes it need to be dependent on something else. So it says phrases can also begin with these words, but phrases, again, cannot have both a subject and a predicate. So that is just something we need to keep in mind while we're doing these things. So number 1 says, before he began his career as an artist, Baradin received a degree in education. So if we look at before he began his career as an artist, well, we know that that doesn't make sense on its own. So it either has to be a phrase or a dependent clause. Now, let's look to see if it has both a subject and a predicate. So here, the subject of this sentence is what? He, which would also be Baradin, but it's he, okay? So he did what? He began his career as an artist. That's going to be our predicate, is the fact that he began his career. So if we have the subject he and the predicate began in the same sentence, or in the same underlined part, that means it can't be a phrase because it has both a subject and a predicate. So we know that it is a clause. And since it says before he began his career as an artist, that can't stand on its own, so we know it is a dependent clause. So we need to put a D above that. So the next one says, after college, he worked as a social worker in New York City. Now it says after college. Okay, well that doesn't make sense on its own, so it either has to be a phrase or a dependent clause. Now, after is one of the words that they say, oh, it could begin a dependent clause. but all we have after that is college. Well, the predicate in this sentence is worked because that's what he's doing. Is that in the underlined part? No. So that means that this only contains the subject, does not contain the predicate, so it is a phrase because it doesn't contain both the subject and the predicate. The next one says, he studied the works of many European artists, including Picasso and Matisse. So if we just look at, he studied the works of many European artists, that makes sense on its own. So therefore we know it has both a subject and a predicate, which would mean it's a clause, and it makes sense on its own, so it has to be a independent clause. So let's look at 4. It says, Bearden also studied African art and Chinese landscape paintings. So it says African art and Chinese landscape paintings. We think African art and Chinese landscape paintings, what? Like, there's nothing more to it. Now, is there any sort of, then we know it has to be a dependent clause or a phrase. Is there any sort of verb in this underlined section? No, it's just saying African art, which is one object, Chinese landscape paintings, another object. That means it has to be a phrase because it only contains, or it doesn't contain either a subject or a predicate because Bearden is our subject and studied is our predicate. And so therefore, this one is a phrase. It contains neither a subject or a predicate. It just contains some objects. So hopefully this is pretty easy sailing for you guys here. I want you guys to do page 10 on your own for practice. Tomorrow we'll be back in our reading packet, and then Friday we'll be back in the writing packet again. So make sure you guys are writing one paragraph for that journal entry and completing page 10 on your own. If you have any questions, as always, I'm available in office hours. So hopefully I'll talk to you guys then.